It was Friday, October 14th, 2016, a little after 2:43 a.m. when everything changed. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence where even the ticking of a clock feels deafening. I remember staring at the faint glow of my phone screen, scrolling through nothing in particular when I first heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not on my bedroom door, not on the walls, but from inside the house, somewhere down the hallway. For a moment, I froze. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, and my breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that maybe it was a wooden frame settling, or the pipes, or some trick of my tired brain. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly intentional. I sat up in bed, the blue light of my phone now casting long, nervous shadows across the sheets. I checked the time again, 2:45 a.m. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer. Who could be in my house at this hour? How did they get inside? And why were they knocking, as if waiting for me to respond? Every horror story I'd ever heard seemed to collapse into that single moment. I thought about my locked doors, the bolted windows, the fact that I lived alone. None of it made sense. None of it made me feel safe. I tried to convince myself to stay put, to ignore it. Maybe it would stop. Maybe it was nothing. But the silence that followed was worse than the knocks themselves. Thick, heavy, expectant. That's when I realized the truth. The sound hadn't come from the front door. It hadn't come from outside at all. It was closer, somewhere inside my home. And that was only the beginning. My name is Daniel. I was 28 at the time, living alone in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of a quiet suburban town. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names, lawns were neatly trimmed, and nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. It was safe, at least that's what I thought. The house itself was small but comfortable. A single-story structure with faded white paint, shutters that rattled whenever the wind picked up, and a porch that creaked under your weight. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. I'd furnish it with a mix of old family hand-me-downs and pieces I'd picked up at second-hand stores, a worn leather couch, a heavy oak dining table, and bookshelves filled with novels I kept promising myself I'd read. My days were simple. I worked as a graphic designer from home, which meant long hours at my desk staring at a screen, sketching ideas, and answering client emails. I liked the freedom it gave me, the quiet routine of making coffee in the morning, feeding my cat, Milo, and settling into work while the neighborhood slowly came to life outside. Nights were equally predictable. I'd cook something easy, maybe throw a frozen pizza in the oven, then unwind with a movie or scroll through my phone until sleep finally crept in. Sometimes I'd take Milo out on the porch, listening to the crickets while the cool night air brushed against my skin. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Looking back, there were small things, details I dismissed at the time, that should have warned me. A misplaced book I swore I hadn't moved. The faint sound of footsteps when I was certain I was alone. Milo staring into empty corners of the room, his fur bristling for no reason. One evening, about a week before the knocking started, I came home from a quick grocery run and noticed the back door slightly ajar. I froze, groceries dangling from my arms. I always locked that door. Always. I told myself maybe I'd been careless. Maybe I'd forgotten in my rush. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that someone had been there. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed. Nothing. The silence mocked me, making me feel foolish for even worrying. I convinced myself it was nothing, shut the door, locked it tight, and carried on. But the unease lingered, like a splinter under the skin. The house didn't feel the same after that. Shadows seemed deeper. The creaks of the old wood at night felt heavier, louder. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting stress get the better of me. Still, every time I walked through the hallway at night, I felt a chill crawl up my spine, as if someone, or something, was standing just out of sight. And then there was Milo. Cats are sensitive creatures, but his behavior became strange. He'd hiss at corners, stare intently at the empty hallway, or bolt suddenly from the room as if chased. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to find him sitting on my chest, eyes wide, staring at the closed bedroom door. His body was tense. It was flat, tail flicking nervously. I whispered his name, tried to calm him, but he didn't even blink. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. But somewhere deep down, I already knew something was wrong with the house. And that uneasy silence, it was only waiting to grow louder. It was a Tuesday night, just after midnight, when the first real disturbance happened. I had been working late, finishing up revision for a particularly demanding client. My eyes ached from the glow of the monitor, and my shoulders felt stiff from sitting too long. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of my computer fan, and the occasional rustle of Milo shifting in his sleep on the couch behind me. When I finally shut everything down and turned off the desk lamp, I felt that familiar heaviness of exhaustion. The air in the house seemed unusually still, almost thick. I brushed it off and made my way down the hall toward the bedroom, Milo padding lazily after me. That's when I heard it, a faint creak, like the slow pressure of a footstep on an old wooden plank. I stopped mid-stride, every nerve in my body tightening. The sound had come from the far end of the hallway, near the back door. I listened, holding my breath. Silence. Just the house settling, I whispered to myself. I wanted to believe it. Old houses make noises all the time. I'd heard creaks, groans, and pops before, with expanding, pipes contracting. But this one felt different, intentional. I shook it off, went into my bedroom, and shut the door behind me. Milo slipped inside, curling up at the foot of the bed. I crawled under the covers and tried to relax, but my mind wouldn't let go of that sound. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, straining my ear for anything out of place. And then it came again. Creak. This time, closer. My chest tightened. The sound had traveled down the hall, nearer to my room. I sat up, my heart thudding so loud I was sure Milo could hear it too. His ears twitched, and he lifted his head, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He was listening too. I reached for the baseball bat I kept propped against the wall by the nightstand. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of my phone, but I didn't want to call anyone. Not yet. Not when I couldn't even prove something was wrong. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Nothing. No more creaks. No more movement. Just silence, pressing heavy against my eardrums. Finally, I forced myself to breathe. I laughed quietly, nervously, shaking my head. You're imagining things, I muttered. You're overtired. That's all. The rationalizations came easily. It could have been the wind rattling the old frame. It could have been Milo jumping off the couch. It could have been anything but what my imagination wanted to paint. I laid back down, pulling the blanket tight around me, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes kept darting toward the door, half expecting it to open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under, but the sleep I found was shallow and restless. My dreams were thick with shadows and muffled sounds of footsteps echoing just beyond reach. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. Over coffee, I convinced myself it was nothing but nerves and fatigue. I worked through the day, ignoring the way Milo seemed skittish, how he avoided the hallway altogether. That night, though, as I lay in bed scrolling aimlessly through my phone, the silence pressed down again. The air felt heavier, colder, though I knew the heater had kicked on. I set the phone aside, closed my eyes, and then, creak, my eyes flew open. It was the same sound, same pace, same weight, like someone deliberately pressing down on the floorboards. Milo growled softly at the foot of the bed, a low, uneasy rumble I had never heard from him before. His gaze was fixed on the door. I told myself it was nothing, that it had to be nothing. I had locked all the doors. I had checked the windows. I was alone. But the sound came again, louder this time, closer, creak, right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles went white. My heart thundered in my chest, and sweat pricked the back of my neck. I didn't move, couldn't move. And then, creak, the unmistakable sound of pressure shifting on the wood, as though something, was standing just on the other side of the thin wooden door. Milo hissed, his back arched, fur bristling. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and then I heard it again. The next few nights blurred into each other, a strange cycle of anticipation and dread. I'd crawl into bed, force myself to sleep, only to wake to some sound, some flicker, some shift in the house that left me frozen in the dark. At first it was the creaks, those deliberate, heavy steps pacing the hallway. But then the noises multiplied. One night, I woke to the faint scrape of fingernails against the wall, a slow, dragging sound that seemed to stretch along the hallway outside my room. Milo sat rigid, eyes wide, his head turning as though following something invisible moving across the plaster. I held my breath until it stopped, every muscle in my body screaming to move, yet I couldn't. When I finally dared to look, there were faint, uneven scratches on the paint the next morning. I told myself I'd done it while moving furniture. Or maybe Milo had pawed at the wall when I wasn't looking. It was easier to invent explanations than face the truth. But explanations don't hold when evidence piles up. Strange signs. By the third night, I noticed small, unsettling changes in the house. My kitchen chairs weren't in the same position I'd left them. A framed photo of my parents, which usually sat on the mantel, was lying flat on the floor. I had no memory of touching it. I started to test myself. I'd lock the back door, double-check every window, even take photos of the rooms before bed. But each morning, something would be different. A chair moved, a cupboard left open, a door slightly ajar. I even began to doubt my own memory. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe stress was finally catching up to me. I searched signs of sleepwalking on my phone more times than I'd like to admit. But sleepwalking doesn't explain the sound of footsteps. It doesn't explain the scratches. It doesn't explain the voice. The whisper. It was Thursday night when I heard it, soft, almost fragile, like someone murmuring from the far end of the hall. I was drifting off when it cut through the silence, a faint whisper, unintelligible but human. I sat up, straining to catch it again. My ears rang with silence. Then it came back, louder, clearer. Daniel. My blood turned cold. Hearing your name in the dark is different than any other word. It's personal, targeted. I stumbled out of bed, bat in hand, my pulsar hammer in my throat. Milo growled, low and guttural, his eyes fixed on the hallway. "Who's there?" I shouted, though my voice cracked, betraying the fear I tried to disguise. No answer, just silence thick enough to choke on. I stood there for what felt like an eternity before retreating back into my room, locking the door and pressing my back against it. I didn't sleep a second that night. Doubt and paranoia. By day, everything seemed normal. Sunlight spilled through the windows, warming the living room, making the house feel harmless again. But as soon as the sun dipped, unease crept back in like fog rolling through the cracks. I started keeping the lights on at night, every bulb blazing until the place looked less like a home and more like a hospital ward. The electric bill skyrocketed, but I didn't care. Darkness felt dangerous now. I even confided in a friend, Chris, over the phone. "Man, I think my house is haunted." I half-joked, trying to disguise the tremor in my voice. He laughed at first, then paused when he realized I wasn't laughing too. "You sure you're not just stressed? Working too much?" "I hear things. I've seen things move. Milo act like there's something here." Chris sighed. "Maybe you need to get out of there for a while. Come stay with me for a few nights." But pride, stubbornness, or maybe something darker, kept me from leaving. This was my home. I couldn't just run from shadows. The photo. One night, while scrolling through my phone, I stumbled across something I couldn't explain. In my gallery, between random screenshots and project drafts, there was a photo I hadn't taken. It showed my bedroom, my bed, me, asleep. The photo was dark, grainy, but unmistakable. I was lying under the covers, Milo curled at my feet. The angle suggested it had been taken from the corner of the room, near the door. My stomach dropped. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't sleep that night either. Evidence in the flesh. The next day, desperate for reassurance, I scoured the house in daylight. I checked the locks, the closets, the attic. That's when I found them. Footprints. Faint but visible, dusty impressions on the hardwood floor of the hallway. They were barefoot. Too long. Too narrow. Not mine. I crouched down, heart racing, tracing them with trembling fingers. They led from the back door toward my bedroom, and then vanished halfway, as if whoever made them had simply dissolved into thin air. I cleaned them up immediately, scrubbing the floor until it gleamed. But the image burned itself into my mind. The night it escalated. By the weekend, I was living in constant fear. Every creak, every shadow stretched too long, every gust of wind felt like a threat. My paranoia grew until even mirrors unsettled me. I kept catching glimpses of shapes that didn't belong, movements that stopped when I looked directly. That Saturday night, as I sat at the dining table with Milo curled nearby, the house grew unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful quiet, predatory quiet. Then came the sound, a slow, deliberate rattle at the back door. My pulse surged. I grabbed the bat, creeping toward it, every step heavy with dread. The knob jiggled, twisted, then stopped. Silence. I waited, sweat dripping down my spine. Then, bang! The door slammed violently, as if something had hurled its full weight against it. Milo hissed, bolting beneath the couch. I staggered back, the bat slipping slightly in my grip. My breath came in sharp gasps. The banging stopped. The silence returned. I forced myself closer, hands shaking as I reached for the knob. I told myself to be rational, to be brave, and that's when the handle slowly began to turn on its own. The moment the doorknob began to twist on its own, my entire body seized with panic. The metal rattled under an unseen grip, slow and deliberate, as though whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wanted me to know they could come in any time they pleased. I staggered back, bat raised, sweat dripping from my forehead. My throat felt dry, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. Milo crouched beneath the couch, his low growl vibrating through the silence. The knob stopped. For a few seconds, there was only the ticking of the wall clock and the uneven rasp of my own breathing. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then the door slammed inward with such force the hinges shrieked. I stumbled back with a cry, the bat slipping from my trembling hands. The entryway yawned open to blackness. Nothing stood there. No intruder. No shadow. Just cold, suffocating air pouring in like a tide. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice breaking, the sound echoing through the house. The lights flickered. Once, twice. Then darkness swallowed everything. Chaos unleashed. In the pitch black, every sense sharpened. I heard movement. Fast, frantic footsteps rushing across the floor. Too many. Too close. They circled me, darting from one side to the other, impossible to pin down. I snatched my phone from my pocket, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The weak beam cut through the dark, illuminating only fragments of the chaos. A chair toppling over, the edge of a picture frame crashing to the floor, scratches appearing on the wall as if carved by invisible hands. A sudden rush of cold air brushed against my neck, so close it felt like breath. I spun, swinging the bat blindly into empty space. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, the sound roar torn from my throat. Something answered. A low, guttural laugh, distorted, echoing from everywhere at once. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Face to face. The flashlight flickered. For a split second, the beam caught something in the corner of the room. A figure, tall, thin, skin stretched pale and tight over bones. Its eyes, hollow, impossibly dark, locked onto mine. And its mouth, it was smiling. The light sputtered out, plunging me into blackness again. I didn't wait. I ran. Flight. I sprinted down the hallway, Milo darting past me, his claws skittering against the wood floor. Every step I took was chased by pounding footsteps, heavier, faster, closing in. My lungs boned, my chest heaved, but I didn't dare look back. I threw myself into the bedroom, slamming the door and jamming a chair under the knob. My hand shook violently as I grabbed my phone, desperately dialing 911. The line clicked. A voice answered, but it wasn't the operator. It was my own voice, whispering, "You can't escape." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The doorknob rattled. The chair screeched against the floor. Something pounded against the wood, each slam rattling the frame. Milo hissed, pressed against the corner of the room, his body trembling. I grabbed the bat again, holding it tight, praying the door would hold. Then silence. The break-in. I didn't dare move. My chest rose and fell in shallow, shaky breaths. my ears strained for any sound. And then, creak. I looked to the closet door. It was slowly, silently opening. I froze. Every muscle screamed to move, to run, but my body betrayed me. The darkness inside the closet seemed thicker than the rest of the room, swallowing the faint light spilling through the cracks. A hand emerged, long, thin, fingers curling around the frame. I screamed, swinging the bat with all my strength. The wood splintered against something solid, and a shriek tore through the room, a sound so high-pitched and unnatural it made my teeth ache. The force knocked me back, the bat clattering from my grip. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline drowning my fear. I yanked the chair away, flung the door open, and bolted down the hall. Desperate escape. The house itself seemed alive now. The lights flickered violently. Objects flew from shelves. Doors slammed open and shut with deafening bangs. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting and writhing in grotesque shapes that didn't match anything in the room. I crashed into the kitchen, fumbling for the back door. My hands shook too badly to work the lock. But finally it gave, and I stumbled out into the night air. The cold hit me like a slap. The street was empty, silent, the neighborhood shrouded in darkness. Every house looked dead, every window black. I ran barefoot across the yard, gravel biting into my soles, Milo darting ahead of me like a streak of shadow. I didn't stop until I reached the street light at the end of the block, the only one still burning. I collapsed under it, gasping, shaking, my heart racing like it would tear itself apart. Milo pressed against me, his tiny body trembling. Behind us, my house loomed in the distance, dark, silent. And then, from the open doorway, I saw it, the figure, standing in the threshold, head cocked, watching me, still smiling. And then, just as the light above me flickered, it stepped back into the dark and vanished. Temporary resolution. The police arrived minutes later. By then, the house was quiet again. They searched every room, every closet, every inch of the property. Nothing. No footprints. No broken locks. No evidence of anyone ever being there. Could have been a break-in, one officer said, though his voice lacked conviction. But whoever it was, they had gone now. I nodded numbly, unable to find the words to argue. They left me standing in the yard, Milo curled in my arms, the house looming behind me like a hungry mouth. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. The sun began to rise, bleeding pale light across the horizon. For the first time in hours, I felt the crushing weight lift slightly. I was alive. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hours after the police left felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. I stood on the porch, staring at the empty street, the pale glow of dawn washing the houses in fragile light. My house loomed behind me, still, silent, and yet I couldn't bring myself to cross the threshold again. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me inside. I locked every door, checked the windows twice, and sat at the kitchen table with Milo perched on my lap. My hands shook as I sipped lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste doing nothing to ground me. Every sound, every creak, every sigh of the old wood sent jolts of panic through my chest. For the first few days, I couldn't function. I left all the lights on, day and night, until the house buzzed with electricity. I kept the bat within arm's reach, carried my phone everywhere, and jumped at the smallest noises. I barely ate. Sleep came only in brief, restless bursts, filled with nightmares so vivid I often woke drenched in sweat, convinced a figure was standing over me. I'd bolt upright, heart pounding, only to find the room empty, though Milo often sat rigid, his gaze fixed on some invisible presence in the corner. The police report became a joke to me. They'd written it up as a possible attempted burglary, but even the officers hadn't believed it. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no damage, just my frantic words, my trembling voice, and a story that sounded insane even as I told it. Friends tried to check in, but I found myself pulling away. How could I explain what happened when I barely understood it myself? Chris called a few times, offering me his couch, but pride, or maybe fear of bringing whatever this was with me, kept me here. The paranoia. The house changed for me. What had once been home now felt like a predator lying in wait. Hallways seemed longer, darker, each shadow stretched into something threatening. Mirrors unsettled me, I avoided them, afraid of what I might see reflected. Even in broad daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, it was worse. I'd lie in bed, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the knob to turn again. Sometimes I swore I heard whispers threading through the silence, faint, fragmented, like my name carried on the air. Other times it was footsteps, subtle but undeniable, pacing just outside my room. I never saw the figure again, but the absence felt intentional, like it wanted me to know it could come back whenever it pleased. Coping mechanisms. I threw myself into fortifying the house. I bought new locks, reinforced the back door, and installed a security system with cameras in every room. I studied the feeds obsessively, watching the empty hallways, the still kitchen, the closed doors, waiting for something to move. Sometimes the cameras glitched, flickering static, freezing for a few seconds. Once, in the middle of the night, I rewound the footage and nearly dropped my phone. For a single frame, there was something standing in the hallway. A blurred, pale outline. Too tall, too thin. Its head cocked at the same angle I remembered. I deleted the clip immediately, as if erasing it from the device could erase it from reality. But the image lived on in my mind. Shifts in daily life. I stopped inviting people over. I couldn't risk them noticing something I couldn't explain. My work suffered. Client complained about missed deadlines, sloppy designs. I stopped caring. Survival felt more important than income. Even outside, the world felt changed. The streets of my quiet neighborhood seemed emptier, as if everyone had vanished. The grocery store felt cavernous, too quiet. Every time I walked past a reflective surface, shop windows, car mirrors, I caught myself glancing, bracing to see something over my shoulder. Milo became my anchor. His behavior remained erratic, sometimes playful and normal, other times growling at nothing, his back arched. But his presence kept me sane. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd lie with him pressed against my side, his small body vibrating with purrs that sometimes drowned out the silence long enough to keep me from spiraling. The lingering reminder. Weeks passed, but the fear didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Trauma has a way of reshaping the world around you. Every sound became a threat. Every darkened corner, a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. One night, desperate for sleep, I burned incense and put on soft music, anything to drown out the silence. I drifted off, finally, only to wake hours later to a smell that didn't belong. Not incense, not smoke, but something sharp, metallic, blood. I sat up, heart hammering. The room was empty, the music long since stopped, but the scent hung in the air, faint but undeniable. I searched the entire house, every room, every corner. Nothing. No source. The smell faded eventually, like it had never been there at all. But from that night on, every faint metallic tang, rust, pennies, even red meat, made my stomach twist with dread. It was a reminder I couldn't escape. A reminder that whatever had invaded my home still lingered, unseen but not gone. Living with it. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. My locks are strong. My cameras run 24/7. The lights stay on, but fear has woven itself into the fabric of my life. I no longer wait for something to happen. I live with the certainty that it will, and that quiet, terrible truth has changed everything. It's been years since that night, but time hasn't dulled the memory. If anything, it has sharpened it, whittling the terror into something more precise, more permanent. The details play on a loop in my mind, as vivid as the moment they happened, the sound of the knob turning, the scrape of something across the floor, the sight of Milo bristling in shadows I couldn't see. Life went on, of course. It always does. I moved eventually to a smaller apartment across town. I told myself it was practical. Fewer rooms, easier to secure, no creaking floors or yawning hallways. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear to remain in that house. It wasn't just walls and windows anymore. It was a living memory, a place that had been tainted. Lingering shadows. Even now, in my new home, safety feels like a fragile illusion. I've grown accustomed to living with locks, alarms, cameras. I triple-check the doors before bed. I leave a light on in the hallway, not for comfort, but as a warning system. Shadows don't move in lit places. But despite all the precautions, the paranoia lingers. Every flicker of a bulb sets my heart racing. Every unexplained thump from a neighbor upstairs sends me back to that moment when I was alone, helpless, and something, not someone, was inside my house. Friends think I become overly cautious. They laugh when they see the cameras or the reinforced locks. I smile, nod, let them joke. I don't tell them what I know, that vigilance is the only thing standing between me and something I can't begin to understand. The emotional scar. The hardest part isn't the fear, it's the mistrust. The world feels thinner now, like the barrier between what we see and what we can't is just paper, ready to tear at the slightest touch. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I don't believe in random noises, or houses settling, or just the wind. Every sound has weight. Every silence has meaning. Even sleep isn't safe. Nightmares follow me, and though the details shift, the core is always the same. I'm back in that room, frozen, as a knob turns, as something unseen waits on the other side. I wake gasping, drenched in sweat, Milo, older now, staring at me with those same unblinking eyes, as if he remembers too. Lessons learned. What did I learn from all of this? People ask me sometimes, usually after I've had too much to drink and I let pieces of the story slip. I tell them the truth. Trust your instincts. That night, my body knew before my mind could process it. The chill down my spine, the prickle of my skin, the way Milo reacted, they weren't coincidences. They were warnings, and I ignored them until it was too late. Now, when I feel that unease, that subtle shift in the air, that whisper of wrongness, I listen. I leave. I check. I act. Paranoia has become my shield. Some call it unhealthy. I call it survival. The haunting reminder. Still, no matter how far I run, there's one thing I can't escape. Every so often, without warning, I'll catch that smell again. Metallic, sharp, like blood. It comes and goes quickly, vanishing before I can trace it. Sometimes in my apartment. Sometimes in a car, sometimes walking down a crowded street. No one else notices it. No one else reacts. But I know what it means. It's a reminder, not of the past, but of a presence, that whatever entered my house that night didn't leave when I did. It stayed. It follows. It waits. Looking back, I often think about who I was before that night. Carefree, careless, convinced the world was safe as long as the doors were locked. I look back on that version of myself with pity. I wish I could go back, warn him, tell him to leave the moment Milo started hissing at shadows. Tell him that the world isn't as solid as he thinks. That sometimes the things we fear in stories and nightmares aren't stories at all. But I can't. All I can do is carry the lesson forward, heavy and permanent. Fear is a message, and ignoring it can cost you more than sleep. Closing reflection. So yes, I moved on. I rebuilt. I kept living. But living doesn't feel the same anymore. It feels conditional, temporary, as though one night, without warning, the knob will turn again, no matter where I am, no matter how far I've run. And when it does, because deep down, I know it will, there won't be a second escape. Because you can't outrun something that was never outside to begin with. It was inside all along. Last night, as I sat at my desk, finishing some late work, I heard it again. Not loud, not insistent, just soft, 3 slow knocks. At first, I told myself it was the neighbors, or maybe the building settling. But the sound wasn't coming from the door or the walls. It was coming from the inside, from the closet. My stomach clenched. Milo, now older and slower, lifted his head and let out a low growl I hadn't heard in years. His eyes locked on the thin line of shadow beneath the door. The knocks came again, 3 deliberate taps, each one spaced exactly the same. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the phone with trembling fingers, but before I could dial, the sound stopped. Silence stretched, heavy and endless. I waited, frozen, every muscle tight. And then the knob on the closet door twitched. Just once. A tiny shift, almost playful. The same way it had years ago. I don't know what's waiting in there. I don't know if it's been with me all along, following, watching, waiting for the right moment. But I do know this. The knocking never really ended. It just paused. And tonight, it started again.